Hello everyone, it's Scott, and we're back today for the start of Modern Horizons 3 spoiler season. So we got a lot of interesting cards to look at today from the set, and the power level is, as you can expect, very high for these cards. So let's dive in to Modern Horizons 3. So first we got the rest of the Flare series of cards for the set. Each of these cards can be cast by sacrificing a non-token creature of that particular color type rather than paying its mana cost. And then you got some good abilities beyond that. So let's go through them. So first we've got Flare of Malice for 2 and 2 black mana. You get an instant, and you may sacrifice a non-token black creature rather than paying this spell's mana cost. Each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker with the greatest mana value among creatures and planeswalkers they control. So very powerful black ability. Definitely a card that I can see players in Modern using. Next, we've got Flare of Fortitude for 2 and 2 white mana. You may sacrifice a non-token white creature rather than pay this spell's mana cost. Until end of turn, your life total can't change, and permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible. So very powerful ability there, giving all your creatures hexproof and indestructible. And basically, if you play this, your opponent can't win the game on that turn because your life total can't change. So this is a really powerful ability as well on this card. And finally, we got Flare of Duplication for 1 and 2 red mana. You get an instant, and you may sacrifice a non-token red creature rather than pay this spell's mana cost. And you get to copy target instant or sorcery spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. So it's a very interesting card because you can look at it one of two ways with Flare of Duplication. You want to duplicate something that you're doing, or maybe your opponent has cast an instant or a sorcery and you want to cast that as well. You play this, you copy it, and then you use it against your opponent. So I think there's some very interesting dynamics with Flare of Duplication that I think it might just be interesting enough to see some Modern play as well. All right, so let's talk about the stars of Modern Horizons 3, which are the Eldrazi Titans. Okay, we've seen one already, so now we've got our last two. We've got Kozilek, the Broken Reality for 9. It's a legendary creature, and of course an Eldrazi. It's a 9/9, and when you cast this spell up to 2 target players, each manifests 2 cards from their hand. For each card manifested this way, you get to draw a card. To manifest a card, put it onto the battlefield face down as a 2/2 creature. Turn it face up anytime for its mana value if it's a creature card. And other colorless creatures you control get +3/+2. So very powerful abilities on Kozilek. The manifest ability is a very nice one where you get to go ahead and basically put 2 creatures on the field without actually having to pay for them, and then you can pay for them later. And they get to be 2/2s until that point where you have the mana to pay for them. So I like that about Kozilek a lot. So is this going to see Modern play? Possibly. And where we're possibly likely to see any of the Titans is in the Tron deck, whether it's green Tron or a colorless Tron deck. That's where I think we're going to see these find a home in Modern. Next, we have Ulamog the Defiler. For 10 mana, you get a legendary creature. That's an Eldrazi. It's a 7/7, and when you cast a spell, target opponent exiles half their library, rounded up, so mills your opponent. It has ward sacrifice 2 permanents, and Ulamog the Defiler enters the battlefield with a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the greatest mana value among cards in exile. So anything you got in exile, this is a way to get some additional +1/+1 counters on Ulamog. And Ulamog has Annihilator X, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on it. So again, Annihilator, that ability to just destroy your opponent's permanents. So both of these cards, bonkers if you can get them on the field. Certainly in Limited, if you get one of these, you're going to want to play it, because it's basically an I win the game kind of card. So I like them a lot. And we'll see how much they can see play in Modern. Next, we've got one of our Planeswalkers from the set. We've got Sorin of House Markov for 1 and a black mana. You get a legendary creature. That's a human noble with lifelink. He's a 1/4. with Extort, and whenever you cast a spell, you may pay white or black mana. If you do, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain that much life. And at the beginning of your post-combat main phase, if you gain 3 or more life this turn, you get to exile Sorin of House Markov, then return him to the battlefield transformed under his owner's control. So you got to gain 3 life to get there. And I would think that you would build your deck around Sorin's ability, because you obviously want to be able to flip him. So you play it on turn 2, and then you can extort things on turn 3 and 4, hopefully gain that 3 life, and then you get Sorin Ravenous Neonite, legendary Planeswalker Sorin with 3 loyalty. The extort ability remains on Sorin, which is nice. Again, whenever you cast a spell, you get to play white or black mana, and if you do, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain that much life. And for his +2 ability, you can create a food token. So food obviously gains 3 life, so you can go ahead and create the food token with Sorin, and then use that to then go ahead and damage your opponent as well, if you want to crack those and cause your opponent to lose some life along the way. For -1, Sorin Ravenous Neonate deals damage equal to the amount of life you've gained this turn to any target. So you gain life, you can use this minus ability to have your opponent lose that much life. And for -6, you get to gain control of target creature. It becomes a vampire in addition to its other types, and put a lifelink counter on it if you control a white permanent other than that creature or Sorin. So I think this is going to go into an Orzhov deck if it's going to see play in Modern. I like the abilities on it, so I think there's some playability to the card. Next, we've got Tamiyo, Inquisitive Student. For 1 blue mana, you legendary creature that's a Moonfolk Wizard, has flying, and is a 0/3. And whenever Tamiyo, Inquisitive Student attacks, you get to investigate. And when you draw your 3rd card in a turn, exile Tamiyo, then return her to the battlefield, transform under her owner's control. And when you do that, and the ability to draw those 3 cards probably isn't going to be very difficult in a blue deck in Modern, where we've got so many cheap draw spells. So I think that requirement won't be difficult to attain. And when you transform Tamiyo, you get Tamiyo Seasoned Scholar, who's a legendary Planeswalker. Tamiyo with 2 loyalty. Her +2 ability until your next turn, whenever a creature attacks you or a Planeswalker you control, it gets -1, -0 until end of turn. So allows her to protect herself a little bit with that. And then for -3, you can return target instant or sorcery spell from your graveyard to your hand. If it's a green card, add 1 mana in any color. And for -7, draw cards equal to half the number of cards in your library, rounded up. You get an emblem with you have no maximum hand size. So if you can get Tamiyo to 7, which means that you're going to plus it 3 separate times, and then on the 4th time you go ahead and ultimate her, that's a really powerful ability. I mean, drawing half the cards in your deck is incredibly powerful and should lead you to being able to win just about any game you're in. So I think definitely something that people who are playing blue will look to do. Next, we've got some lower rarity cards from going from Mythic now down to Rare, and we got our first is Pearl Ear Imperial Advisor. For 1 and 2 white mana, you get a legendary creature that's a Fox Advisor. That's a 3/4 with lifelink. Enchantment spells you cast have affinity for auras. They cost 1 less to cast for each aura you control. And whenever you cast an aura spell that targets a modified creature you control, you get to draw a card. So I like Pearl Ear here, and this is a callback to the original Kamigawa sets. So as a result of that, I think this is playable in an Auras deck, but the question is it good enough for the Modern format? And I think that's a to be determined, but it's an interesting card definitely, and something you could certainly build around. Next, we've got Volatile Stormdrake. For 1 and a blue mana, you get a Drake that's a 3/2 with flying, hexproof from activated and triggered abilities. And when Volatile Stormdrake enters the battlefield, exchange control of Volatile Stormdrake and target creature an opponent controls. If you do, you get 4 energy, then sacrifice this creature unless you pay an amount of energy equal to its mana value. So interesting card here where you basically get a 3/2 for 2 mana, which is fine with flying, and that helps out definitely. The exchange control I'm not so high on with that ability, where you're kind of giving this to your opponent and you're getting, their best creature, hopefully. And if you do that, then you have to spend energy to go ahead and cover its mana cost. So I'm not as high on this one, but I think this, in the right kind of build, has some modern playability. Next, we've got Detective's Phoenix for 2 and a red mana. You get an enchantment creature. That's a Phoenix and is a 2/2. With Bestow 1 red mana and collect Evidence 6. To pay this Bestow cost, pay 1 and then exile cards with total mana value 6 or greater from your graveyard. Okay, it has flying and haste. Enchanted creature gets +2/+0 and has flying and haste, and you may cast Detective's Phoenix from your graveyard using its Bestow ability. So you can bring it in as a 2/2, or you can bring it in and attach it to something because you want to give something else haste. So I think, it's an interesting card. Is it good enough for Modern? I'm not sure on that one, but it's a fun card to play at least. Next, we have Power Balance for 2 red mana. You get an enchantment. And whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may reveal the top card of your library. If you do, you may cast that card without paying its mana cost if the 2 spells have the same mana value. So, very interesting card here, because a lot of the modern decks are going to play cards that are 1, 2, 3 mana. We don't see a lot of higher cost cards in Modern just because of the speed of the format. So I can see this being a pretty effective enchantment. If you get it down on turn 2, and then your opponent, every time they play a spell, you get to look at the top card of your library, you get to reveal it, and then if it is a card with the same mana value, then you get to play that card. And I think that's potentially a pretty powerful ability in Modern. Certainly it helps, in essence, to ramp up red decks. Next, we've got Wheel of Potential for 2 and a red mana. You get a sorcery where you get 3 energy counters. Then you may pay X energy. Each player may exile their hand and draw X cards. If X is 7 or more, you may play cards you owned exiled this way until the end of your next turn. So it's kind of a callback to Wheel of Fortune from early in Magic days, but you're taking that chance of having enough energy to go ahead and spend 7 energy, just draw those 7 cards. And I think that's a pretty good ability in Modern for a relatively low cost. You can go ahead and draw a lot of cards, and if you do hit that 7 energy, then you're going to be able to play those cards that you exile in this turn or the next turn. So I think there's definitely some playability here. Just going to have to find the right deck to make it work. But it's one of those cards I think maybe more of a good limited card than it is a good Modern staple card. Next, we've got Eldrazi Corvette Doll for 1 and 2 green mana. You get a legendary creature that's an elf warrior and a 3/3. And you may look at the top card of your library at any time, and you may cast creature spells from the top of your library. And then for 1 green mana, tap 2 untapped creatures you control, reveal a card from your hand or the top of your library. If you reveal a creature card this way, put it onto the battlefield. Activate only during your turn. So Eldrazi has a really powerful ability. Basically, you get to pay 1 mana to put a creature into play, and that is any creature. It's not limited. So this could be a way of potentially even sneaking in one of those Eldrazi Titans, because you've tapped 2 creatures. You can now put it on the battlefield for that simple 1 mana, which is incredibly powerful. So I think Eldrazi is going to be certainly something that people are going to try in Modern, and we'll see whether it's good enough to find a home. Next, we've got 6 for 2 and a green mana, you get a legendary creature. That's a tree folk and a 2/4 with reach. And whenever 6 attacks, mill 3 cards, you may put a land card from among them into your hand. So 6 ramps you as you go when it attacks, and as long as it's your turn, non-land permanent cards in your graveyard have retrace. You may cast permanent cards from your graveyard by discarding a land card in addition to paying their other cost. So it's a very interesting card because it gives you the ability to basically use anything that's in your graveyard as long as you can discard a card and pay its mana cost, which I think is a pretty solid ability. Now, is this a busted card? Probably not, but it certainly is something that green decks will want to consider in Modern. Next, we've got Thief of Existence for 1, a colorless, and a green mana. You get a creature that's an Eldrazi. That's a 3/4. It has Devoid, which means that this card has no color. And when you cast this spell, exile up to 1 target non-creature, non-land permanent opponent controls with mana value 4 or less. If you do, Thief of Existence gains when this creature leaves the battlefield. Target opponent draws a card. So what this is a removal spell for non-creature cards that might be in play. So we're trying to get rid of enchantments and artifacts that are problematic on the board with this. So I see this as more of a sideboard card than a main deck card, but because it is devoid, you know, if an Eldrazi deck does form in Modern, then this could potentially be part of it because it has that ability to go ahead and clean up something on the opponent's side. Next, we've got Arna Kennerund, Sky Captain for 2, a white, a blue, and a black mana. You can legendary creature, that's a human knight, and a 4/4 with flying and lifelink. And it has ward where you discard a card. So very similar to Graveyard Trespasser but without flying and lifelink. So Graveyard Trespasser doesn't have those abilities, and because of the flying and lifelink, you know, Arna definitely is a better card overall. And whenever a modified creature you control attacks, double the number of each kind of counter on it. Then for each non-token permanent attached to it, create a token that's a copy of that permanent attached to that creature. So basically this is one where we're going to modify things with equipment, with auras, and when those things attack, then we get to double up on any counters they have, plus we get to copy any of the auras that are already on it. So I think that's a pretty solid ability in Modern. The question is, for 5 mana, is it too slow to actually work? Okay, and that's, I think, a to be seen in Esper style decks. Certainly in Limited, a very, very solid card. Next, we've got Genku, Future Shaper for 2, a white and a blue mana. You get a legendary creature that's a moon folk wizard and is a 2/5. And whenever another non-token permanent you control leaves the battlefield, choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn. Create a creature token with those characteristics. So you can create a 2/2 white fox with vigilance, a 1/2 blue moon folk with flying, or a 1/1 black rat with lifelink. And for 3, a white and a blue mana, you can put a +1/+1 counter on each creature that you control. So pretty interesting abilities, you know, and I think, you know, the idea of you permanents leaving your side of the battlefield really is a way to kind of really take advantage of this card. Now, is it good enough for Modern? Maybe. Definitely a good card in Limited. All right, and those were the rares and mythics from today so far. There are a ton of uncommons and commons that we saw also. Some of those are things that I'll talk about in a different video. So for time's sake, we're going to stop here after looking at all the mythics and rares we've seen today, and I'll come back with a video that will highlight some of the more interesting commons and uncommons at a later date. And stay tuned. I will do Modern Horizon 3 spoilers throughout Modern Horizons 3 spoiler season. So I look forward to talking to you about these new powerful cards that are going into Modern. Thanks for watching to the end. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.